그럼 지금부터
Then from now on, let us start the session on US-China Competition and Northeast Asia. Please let me introduce our moderator today, Chairman Kim Sung-hwan of East Asia Foundation. He's working as professor of Yonsei University GSIS. Please welcome Chairman Kim Sung-hwan.
Ladies and gentlemen, as just now MC introduced, my name is Sung-hwan Kim and moderator of this session. Actually, I'm not teaching at Yonsei University. I used to teach at the Hanyang University, but there was some mistake, I think. Anyhow, I wish to welcome all of you and thank you for joining us in this US-China Competition and Northeast Asia session. It is already 5 months since President Biden inaugurated, but still Biden administration's policy review on China has not been completed. So in this session, our speakers will foresee the US-China relations and the geopolitical situation in Northeast Asia under Biden administration and discuss how countries in the region would respond to protect their national interest in the midst of US-China strategic competition. And the speakers will also discuss what the countries in the region can play to mitigate the US-China rivalry. And to this end, we invited 4 distinguished experts. Mr. James Miller, he is former U.S. Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, and now he is a senior fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. And General Yao Yunju from China. She is a retired Major General of the People's Liberation Army and currently an academic committee member of the Center for International Security and Strategy at the Tsinghua University. And Ambassador Fujisaki Ichiro from Japan. He is former Japanese ambassador to the United States, and now he is the chairman of the Nakasone Peace Institute. And Dr. Park Chul-hee, who is sitting together with me here in Jeju. He is the professor at the Graduate School of International Studies and the director of Institute of International Affairs at the Seoul National University. Now we have around 75 minutes, so we will hear from our 4 speakers first, and then we'll have a discussion session. And if time permits, we'll take some questions from the audience. So now let me start with the first speaker. So we'll hear from 4 speakers first, and we'll have some discussion. And then if time permits, then we'll take questions from the audience. So Mr. Miller, I will start with you. Are you ready now?
Yes, I am, Minister Kim. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please, floor is yours. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, I was asked to address a number of questions, and what I thought I would do is actually go through and answer each of them. And if it's okay, I'll take about 5 or 6 minutes to do so. Is that okay, Minister Kim?
Sure, yeah. Yes, you can.
Okay, very, very good. Thank you. Well, it's nice. It's very nice to be here and to join the forum. I'm sorry that all of us were not able to be there in person, and hope to have the opportunity with my colleagues and myself in the future. The first question I was asked to address was, how do I foresee the US-China relations and geopolitical situation in East Asia under the Biden administration? And let me just start by stating what I think is obvious, and that is East Asia is of critical economic importance, 2 of the 3 largest GDPs in the world and several others that rank very high. And it's also of top security importance globally. The US-China competition, economic, technological, ideological, and military, will shape the regional issues and will shape global affairs as well. And of course, the Korean Peninsula remains of great concern in its own right, in addition, for the potential to affect US-Chinese relations and even potentially a crisis or conflict. So the bottom line is I expect the Biden administration to take a very clear-eyed view of China, of the region, and to work closely with allies and partners to apply a strong and consistent approach. I want to say that U.S. policymakers for many administrations had worked to create conditions under which, from our perspective, China would become a quote-unquote responsible stakeholder in the international system. It seems that we're on another path now, one more of more direct competition, but we shouldn't give up hope of building those bridges. The second question I was asked to address was whether the United States sees China as a competitor or an adversary or something else. My own perspective on this, I think it's borne out by administration statements, is that first and foremost, China is a competitor economically, technologically, ideologically, militarily, as I said. It's a potential adversary, and it's important that we keep it potential only. And that I'll talk about some of those issues in a moment. And third, and of critical importance, China remains an incredibly important partner to the United States and many others on trade, on climate change, on non-proliferation, and on many other global issues. I was asked to address the question of what is the similarity and difference between President Trump's China policy and President Biden's China policy. The biggest similarity, I believe, is that there's a recognition that there's an ongoing competition with China that is critical to global stability and to the interests of the United States and many other nations. Now, the biggest differences, in my view, are that the Biden administration will work to fashion bipartisan and clear-eyed, consistent policies. And secondly, that the Biden administration will work closely with our allies and partners. I was asked to address what do I think are the potential flashpoints. And I want to say at the outset that there are plenty of reasons for tension. Controversies over theft of intellectual property, cyber intrusions, coercion in the region all create a difficult environment. But I would highlight Taiwan, the Korean Peninsula, and Senkaku Islands as critical potential flashpoints. Obviously, a military incident on the sea, in the air, space, or a cyber attack could provide a spark as well. In a moment, I'll speak about the importance of building dialogues and building channels of communication to reduce those risks. I was asked if I thought multilateral approaches would be helpful. My answer is not only helpful, but essential. And I'm sure that we'll talk more about that. How can countries in East Asia play roles that could mitigate this rivalry? I believe that all countries in the region have important roles to play. And I believe that sustained US presence, economically, diplomatically, and militarily, is critical to the stability in the region. And that strong alliances and strong partnerships, both bilateral and in some cases multilateral, will help reduce the risk of miscommunication and miscalculation. So to be specific, just to pick two countries, Japan and South Korea play key roles not only as allies, but also as having good communications with China and sharing their assessments of what motivates Chinese behavior and their assessments of where the United States has things right and where we should adjust and how we can operate most effectively together. I could call out other countries as well, but in the interest of time, I won't. I'm going to address 4 more questions that I was asked and do so quickly. How do I see the impact of the Quad initiative on the political situation in East Asia? I see it very positively, and I take its objective as just as stated, which is, and I'm going to quote here, a region that is free, open, inclusive, healthy, anchored by democratic values and unconstrained by coercion. And we may not all agree on the anchor by democratic values, but those who do believe in it, I believe have not just a right, but an obligation to work together toward that end. And I hope that we all have an agreement on the other issues, including unconstrained by coercion. And I believe all countries in the region and more broadly in the world have a strong interest in avoiding coercion and a strong interest in avoiding military conflict. Three additional questions I'd like to address.
Mr. Miller,
One is,
or
shall I stop there?
Yeah. 3 additional questions I will ask you personally later. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Then I'm done.
Help our audience understand. I gave questions in advance to our speakers. So at first, we'll hear from our speakers about that questions. The questions were how our speakers foresee the US-China relations and the geopolitical situation in East Asia under Biden administration. And we want to hear from them. Particularly, Biden administration sees China as a competitor or adversary or potential enemy. And also, I gave the question, what's the similarity and difference between President Biden's China policy and President Trump's China policy? And what is the possible flashpoint of tension in East Asia? And also, I asked them, the multilateral approach would be helpful in mitigating US-China strategic competition in East Asia, and also how countries in East Asia can play some roles that can mitigate the US-China rivalry. And also, I asked our speakers about the impact of Quad initiative. So I think you will hear from all our speakers on these questions first. Okay, thank you, Mr. Miller. And I will turn to General Yao. General Yao, floor is yours, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Minister Kim. First, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to the forum and discuss the important issues of China-American relations. I would be a little prudent on predictions for Biden administration. For the Biden administration has not yet finished reviewing its China policy. However, based on what it has been seeing and doing, we can see some similarities and differences between this and the previous administrations. The similarities include both share the perception that China is the greatest challenge to the United States economically, militarily, ideologically, and the current rule-based international order is also threatened, and it is a common threat to the value-based community in the world. So both administrations give up the 4-decade-long engagement policy with China. And the Biden administration inherited all the trade tariffs, the technology decoupling measures, sanctions on Chinese companies, and restrictions on people exchanges imposed by the previous administration. The Biden administration continues to suspect China regarding the origin of the COVID-19 virus. And it attacks China for policies in Xinjiang and Hong Kong, sometimes in tougher languages than the Trump administration. And President Biden perceives the strife between China and the United States as between democracy and autocracy, and keep the strife in the ideological aspect. And it continues with strong military measures against what it considers as China's assertive and coercive military activities. And lastly, it stays on the same path to change its one China policy regarding interactions with Taiwan. And there are some differences. The first difference is that Biden administration starts to officially engage China by holding telephone conversations and in-person meetings between top leaders and high-ranking government officials. And more of these can be expected in the coming months, and even a summit in October, G20 summit. And these exchanges are not to be depicted as warm and fruitful, but can be seen as practical and constructive. And the Biden administration has used the China threat as a glue to reunite allies and partners whom the previous administration had not really cared much. And Biden's foreign policy team, compared with its predecessor, has more expertise on foreign affairs in general and on China in particular. Therefore, in dealing with China, more predictability, consistency, and rationality should be expected, which might help stabilize the relationship. And the Biden administration has stopped targeting its attack against the Chinese Communist Party, its leadership, and its nearly 100 million members, and ceased to suggest a regime change. And they have started, China and the United States have started to cooperate on countering climate change, which is impossible for the last administration to do. And they both also started to discuss regional as well as non-proliferation issues, such as Myanmar, Iran, and the DPRK nuclear issue. So how do I foresee the future of the relationship? I would be a little bit prudent to predict. Secretary Blinken has depicted the relation as competitive when it should be, cooperative when it could be, and adversarial when it must be. It seems that the future US-China policy will be a combination of everything, with strategic competition as the overarching concept. Beijing has not changed its policy line toward the United States and still uses the same language as it used during the Obama and Trump administration. That is, China seeks a relationship of no conflict, no confrontation, mutual respect, cooperation, and win-win. Although China is reluctant to accept strategic competition as the defining feature in the relationship, it realizes that the changes in US policy toward itself will be inevitable and fundamental, and it is ready for the worst to come. And the geopolitical impact on East and Northeast Asia will be complicated and grave in the context of US-China competition. US allies and partners in East Asia would frequently feel pressed to choose between the two major powers and between economic gains and security protection. President Biden, in his first round of East Asia diplomatic efforts, aimed to strengthen bilateral alliances and vitalize the Quad framework to collectively confront the China threat. And the competition could reduce the incentive for the both major powers to cooperate on regional issues. So far, we have not seen much cooperation on providing COVID-19 vaccine to the region on post-pandemic arrangement for society opening up and for people flow and for economic recovery. Both China and the United States support ASEAN's role in stabilizing the situation in Myanmar, but we have not seen much bilateral coordination on it. And nuclear proliferation on the Korean Peninsula used to be an issue for cooperation. The Biden administration has finished its policy review regarding North Korea, but not yet rolled out its diplomatic efforts. Secretary Blinken and Director Yang Jiechi discussed the matter over the phone two weeks ago, and the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has reiterated the Chinese position, which includes a settlement of the issue through dialogue and consultation, a dual-track approach to achieve denuclearization and a peace mechanism at the same time, and with the approach of phased and synchronized actions to move toward the final goals. It seems to me that China is ready to work with all relevant parties, including the United States, to push for the solution of DPRK nuclear issue. And a few words on Taiwan. The current situation across the Taiwan Strait is evolving in a dangerous direction. The US government, both the current and the previous, have taken unprecedented provocative moves, which deviates from its long-time practice of one China policy. And after each summit or a 2+2 meeting with allies, such as with Japan and the ROK, Taiwan would be included in joint statements with the United States. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, General Liao. We just heard U.S. perspective and the Chinese perspective on U.S.-China relations. So now we will hear, or rather, I cannot say it's neutral, but countries in this region, in Northeast Asia, Japanese perspective from Ambassador Fujisaki, and then Korean perspective from our Professor Park Cheol-hee. Now, Ambassador Fujisaki, floor is yours. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. My view is a Japanese view, which is not an official Japanese view at all. I think it's wrong to see that it's US-China. This is the point, because countries around the world are concerned about Chinese behavior action. I've read recently Professor Wang Jishi's contribution to foreign affairs, very impressive. However, as Chinese scholars write, he is saying that the rest of the world in the United States is concerned about Chinese size, Chinese technologies, China is coming up. That's only part of it. The most important thing is Chinese behavior action. This is why not only United States, Japan, but G7, NATO, and has expressed the same view, and Britain, France, and Germany has been sending the fleets to this region. Quad is one of them. Quad, I think, in my view, is more psychological than real sort of alliance. Now, here, I'm very encouraged, if my interpretation is right, that on May the 31st, President Xi has told Xinhua that China should have the image of trustworthy, lovable, respectable image, and action should be modest and humble, and we should expand the circle of friends. If this is right, I think this is saying that the so-called wolf warriors strategy does not work and has to change the strategy. We hope this is not only the words, but it is translated to action and behavior. if this happens, that is exactly what the rest of the world has been asking China. We want China to be successful. We want China as an economic success, not military threat. So this is the key point, not look at US-China, it's China and the rest. And as for US and China, as you say, Blinken or Biden has already said that it's a combination of collaboration and adversary and competition. And of course, this is a mixed approach will continue. As for Japan, our position with China are threefold. We are next doors. We'll never move from each other. We'll continue to be next door. Second, largest economic partner. We are our trading partner. China is the most important. But three, we are threatened by the Chinese on Senkaku, and we are concerned about human rights. So this is all combined. Please think that we're not following US on human rights or whatever. It's our policy, but our approach to China is different. We don't try to resort to Magnitsky type of sanction. We have always maintained relations with Myanmar, Iran, Cuba when US were sanctioning. So our approach is different, but our basic thinking on these human rights have been same as United States. Now, lastly, on Flashpoint, I think I may be wrong. Taiwan is not Flashpoint because of two reasons. One, US will continue ambiguous strategy. There are discussions in US, but I think the government will continue that. Second, if you look at China-Taiwan relations, 50 years ago, 70 countries were recognizing Taiwan. Now it's only 15. And China's fourth generation attackers are far more than Taiwan now. It turned in 2007, and you have more fighters than Taiwan, meaning that in time, China's strength will really become a lot stronger, and time is on China's side. Why does China try to take offensive now? I don't think so. It's far more smart, and as President Xi has said, they want a good image in the world, and so that I'm very encouraged by President Xi, and I think you have talked about multilateral approach, but I think most important is that China has already got the message and trying to change themselves. So we don't have to gang up in a multilateral forum and tell Chinese that we are concerned. I think we can do it bilaterally. And I think Chinese are smart enough to getting this image. I'm sorry to use rather blunt words, but this is how I look at it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Professor Park, yeah.
Thank you, Minister Kim. Nice to see you all again. As for the US-China competition, I will say a few points. One, there is no denial that the US-China competition is intensifying as time goes by. But I would define it as a strategic competition rather than hegemony competition. I don't think the level of competition between the two reached a hegemony competition, even though the Graham Ellison at Harvard University say that it almost reached a hegemony competition, and then two countries are destined for war. But I don't think China is not ready yet and willing to challenge against the United States that much. So I think still the competition remains much more regional or interregional rather than global. And I don't think China is trying to expand the competitive space to every domains. I think as General Yao mentioned, depending on the areas, it might be very confrontational, the competitive, but you also have cooperative arenas. So I don't think that the US and China are on the collision course, and then it's inevitable to have a kind of leading to a future war. But I think there is a kind of difference between the Trump period and the Biden period. If Trump period was much more characterized by a much more heading toward a collision course, I think under the Biden administration, it is shifting to a competitive coexistence or cooperative rivalry between the two countries. So as Kurt Campbell and then Sullivan conceptualized it, it's a competition without catastrophe. But it is geared to the purpose of constant search for competitive advantage for the future. So I think in that sense, the nature of competition has been slightly changing, but the basic nature of strategic competition remains the same. And as Mr. Miller mentioned, the potential flashpoints may not remain only the maritime domain. I think it will be expanded to the cyber and space, and then the competition is intensifying as time goes by. So we don't have that much rosy picture about this. So whether there is a kind of a utility of a multilateral mitigation to assuage the tension between the two, yes and no. From my perspective, I think one, international relations theory, we are talking about the relative gains and absolute gains. In the areas of the two countries share absolute gains, which is much more transnational, like climate change, environment, the pandemic, and the non-proliferation. I think the multilateral mitigation can work. But in the areas of a strong competition with relative gains, like military and security arena and high-tech area, I don't think the multilateral approach for mitigation would work. And also, whether the multilateral institutions can really mitigate the tensions between the two, it depends on the area. In the areas of agreed upon orders, like related to sovereignty and the national autonomy, it may work because they cherish the ideal and values. But in the areas of overlapping profits and interest, that might work. I think international institutions will best work in the areas of common interest, like the providing international public goods. But when it comes to the area of power and competition and domination in the geopolitical arena, I don't think a multilateral framework would provide the convincing alternative. But the Minister Kim asked a kind of a question whether coalition policy against China would work. Well, I would be rather prudent or cautious. One, no country wants fierce confrontation and competition, a direct competition with China. I think as for the soft balancing against China, every country is yes. Hard balancing, possibly they have some different and reserved attitude toward that. India is a good example. And then another caveat I wanted to add up is that the isolating China and containing China too much may lead to a very unintended and unexpected outcomes, which means we can make China much more independent and autonomous without little leverage, and then make China much more inward-oriented. And then China may take much more confrontational approach toward outside. So I don't think we have to demonize China. But I think China should behave itself and respecting the international law and rules-based international order, and then try to give up very dominating, high-handed approach to the neighboring countries. Such a country like South Korea, you have to deal with South Korea very gently and comfortably. If you try to take a high-handed approach, you will get a lot of kind of repercussion, and then anti-Chinese feeling will grow in Korea, which is not in the interest of China at all. So as for other questions, I will add up later.
Thank you, Professor Park. As you heard, it seems to me that, for me, it is a bit encouraging to hear that our four speakers, they talk about China-US relations, and they foresee this is not only competition, there will be cooperation as well. So, because for many Koreans, we tend to think that US-China competition will intensify, and always the question is, how should we behave in the midst of that competition? But today, we hear that there is not only competition, but cooperation area as well. So in relation with that, I will ask General Yao and Dr. Miller, under what conditions US and China can cooperate? And you already mentioned some areas of cooperation. So can you tell us what is the condition for cooperation? And if the condition meets, then where is the most possible area of cooperation? General Yao first, and then Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. I think that China and the United States should cooperate on fighting the pandemic and preparing for post-pandemic economic recovery. And there's a lot of things we can do together. And also China and the United States should resume their cooperation on Korean Peninsula denuclearization process. And in South China Sea and East China Sea, at least China and the United States should improve their crisis management mechanism to prevent accidents escalating into military conflict. And there are still a lot of things regarding non-traditional security issues that China and the United States should cooperate. For example, the humanitarian assistance and disaster relief area, counter-terrorism and counter-transnational crimes. And I think that regional multilateral platforms such as East Asia Summit and the various ASEAN Plus frameworks are good platforms for both to cooperate and to achieve, to deliver good public goods for the region. And I think most importantly, the policy for both China and the United States regarding security, economy, and the geopolitics should be more inclusive so that other players in the region can find room to balance against both China and the United States, but not to choose side. And I think if the policies are inclusive enough, the other players, other regional players would have less concern to maintain their own national interest, which might not be the same as American interest or Chinese interest. I'll stop here.
Mr. Miller, how about you? How to think about?
Thank you.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Thank you. I find myself very much in agreement with most of what Major General Yao had to say. And let me just unpack that a little bit. I'd like to see US and Chinese cooperation on COVID-19. It was noted earlier that there are still residual questions about how SARS-CoV-2 came to exist, whether it came from the wild or was inadvertently released from a lab. I think President Biden is right to ask that question of our intelligence community, but also to ask it of the Chinese government as well, and ask for the sharing of all relevant information. We need to do better. There will be future pandemics as well, and we need to do better than we did on this one, sharing information early. It's critically important that China and the United States work together on security issues, including North Korea and Iran, on transnational issues, including climate change, non-proliferation, counterterrorism, transnational crimes. And so here I find us completely in agreement. And I would just add that US-Chinese cooperation on trade, including on rules of the road for trade, where we will have, I'm sure we'll have some further discussions as countries about what those rules should be, but also very important. And I'll make a final point that is very much in agreement with General Yao. Cooperating to reduce the risks of inadvertent conflict, including establishing strong channels of communications at multiple levels, including strategic stability talks that are sustained across years and decades, and that involve very direct and open conversations on issues. I believe there's a lot of work to be done on rules of the road or norms for cyberspace and outer space. And in all of these areas, while the United States has a lot of transparency, sometimes it may sound like it's a cacophony because there's so many different voices. The United States needs to work on establishing sustainable, clear policies over time. And I hope that we will continue to ask China to keep increasing the transparency about its objectives, policies, and capabilities as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I think audience will agree with me that if we hear the remarks by our friends, Mr. Miller and General Liao, then there will not be any competition. There will be only cooperation between US and China. But if you look at the press and you read the newspapers, and if you hear the media news program, then it is totally different. So I think, I hope both countries will get over that domestic consumption of China-US relations. So I want to ask Ambassador Fujisaki that Professor Park briefly mentioned about coalition-driven US policy toward China. Do you think it will work effectively, Ambassador Fujisaki? How do you see that? Can you hear me? I think. Please unmute. Yes.
I'm sorry. As I said at the outset, I do not look at this issue as US-China. I think Graham Allison, a friend of mine, I think was wrong in sketching this as Thucydides' theory, trap. I think it's oversimplification as much as that of Francis Fukuyama's End of History. Second, so I don't think we should form coalition, and I'm very encouraged by President Xi's lovable China. And I wanted to ask, if I may, General Yao, how should I interpret it that President Xi's new message to all of us, saying that China will be a very respectable and trustworthy friend. And President Park said China has not given that image to the neighbors, including South Korea, and to Japan as well. And I'm very encouraged to hear this May 31st Xinhua, and I was wondering if my interpretation is too optimistic. Japanese point of view on China is, this is mine, and it's not government, but three principles. No kowtowing, will not coattail China. Second, will not arouse, in French, énerver, try to stimulate China. Third, no confrontation, cooperate where we can, including economy field. So that's our policy. And I think, I said Taiwan is not flashpoint. Senkaku can be flashpoint if China does something, but I think China is smart enough not to do that. And if General can I ask direct questions to General Yao?
Yes, you can, yes.
Mr. Minister?
Yeah, you can, yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So, General Yao, can you make an answer to Ambassador Fujisaki's question?
Yes, a very quick response. I think President Xi made the speech at a study session of the Political Bureau with one scholar to lecture, actually to talk about how to pose a positive Chinese world image. And Xi's speech is after his speech, and it is to address the misperception, the wrong image of China, and to do a better job at presenting China, and also to correct the approach to sometimes for the other the image, to correct the wrong image or the not exact objective image of China by to exercise more humility and but I because it's just less than 2 weeks ago, and I'm not sure whether you should interpret as a correction of Chinese foreign policy. It's I can't hear you, Ambassador. I can see that you are talking, but I cannot hear you. Ambassador, I cannot hear you if you are talking to me.
And thank you very much. You said it's too early to define that it's a correction of foreign policy, but it could be, it can be. And if so, I think that's very important, because it's not only the image or words, but the policy change, if that could be possible, because everyone was waiting for that. And it's really awaited reaction from the Chinese leader. Thank you very much.
But I have also to say that the so-called euphoria diplomacy,
yes,
is just a label that is not objectively labeled on the Chinese foreign policy. In most cases, these strong words or strong rhetoric in response to demonization of China in many things that the Chinese does in the world. For example, in Xinjiang, it's if it is labeled as genocide, it's just it's far from the fact.
I think my view is similar. That word is not right as well. But sometimes press secretaries of foreign ministry uses a little too strong words as well. And I think you know what I'm talking about. But thank you very much. Thank you very much for explanation. I really appreciate it.
Such strong wording are mostly in response to even stronger wording from other countries, especially from the United States.
Thank you, Ambassador Fujisaki, and thank you, General Yao.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I will turn to Professor Park. I think there are Koreans here, not many numbers, but for us, the most important thing is what's the impact of this Biden administration's China policy on the Korean Peninsula? And between China and the US, how should it behave? What's the best way to do that?
Thank you. Before I reply to the Minister Kim, I wanted to give a kind of comment to General Yao. So if the wolf warrior diplomacy is not objectively labeled, I want you to change it to smiling panda diplomacy rather than the wolf warrior. Wolf warrior is a warrior anyway. So it sounds like a very aggressive, threatening diplomacy from the outside perspective.
Yes,
Panda warrior would be better.
Still warrior. And as for the kind of good question about, I'm a little bit worried about the kind of a future competition between the United States and China. If they are entering into a kind of a competitive course, the North Korea and the Korean Peninsula issue can be handled in that framework. And then I'm very afraid that the Korean Peninsula issue fall prey to a kind of strategic competition between the two countries, and then interpret only from that perspective. But I'm very happy to hear that both Mr. Miller and then General Yao said that the Korean Peninsula issue, and then especially the issue of denuclearization, is in the area of cooperation between the two. I think rather than just kind of approaching the North Korean issue from a non-proliferation perspective, truly completely denuclearizing North Korea is critically important for the stability and peace in the whole region. So I hope the United States and China, together with Korea and Japan, work thoroughly to truly denuclearize North Korea as soon as possible. And I hope I hope China play a bigger role in consolidating NPT regime in Northeast Asia. Many countries, including the United States, recognize China is the sole nuclear power in this region. But if North Korea is recognized as another nuclear power, I think we are abdicating the responsibility to be a participant of the NPT regime. So if China wants to be truly a great power in the region, I think you stick to the rule of the NPT regime and then denuclearize any country that tries to nuclearize in this region. And finally, as for the Korean the strategic choice, I think many people think that this is a binary choice between the United States and China. I don't think that is the kind of a good strategy for South Korea. It's rather than that, I think if I use that word, Korea should take a much more double portion strategy rather than double jeopardy strategy, which means that South Korea should take a partial disengagement from China, not entire disengagement. I think you have to keep very friendly relationship with China, But some issues, like a sovereignty issue, and then security issue, and social values issue, we should be partially disengaged from China, like South Korea's core interest, as China advocates core interest of China. And second, I think the South Korea should maintain some sectorally specified cooperation with the United States, especially in the areas of high-tech industries and higher education. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. Well, it is a difficult task for us anyhow between US and China. As Professor Bach just mentioned, many people think that we depend on economy on China and security on the US. So I think you mentioned that is not a good idea. And in the course of your presentation, our four speakers mentioned Taiwan. So I will ask Mr. Miller that what is Biden administration's Taiwan policy? Do you believe President Biden's Taiwan policy does not contradict with one China policy, which was mentioned by General Yao? Mr. Miller, please. Can you hear me?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I was slow to unmute. I agree with Ambassador Fujisaki that Biden administration appears to be retaining a long-standing policy of strategic ambiguity, and I expect it will reject any calls for so-called strategic clarity. And what that means, of course, is that the administration will continue to follow the Taiwan Relations Act, which has many provisions. But a critical one is that it would consider any effort to determine the future of Taiwan by anything other than peaceful means of grave concern to the United States. And so I see this as an area of continuity, that's longstanding continuity in the United States. And I also agree with the ambassador that Taiwan should not be a flashpoint. It's in neither Taiwan's nor Chinese interest that it becomes so. But that depends on, particularly on Chinese and of course Taiwan behavior, and it depends on China not coercing Taiwan in any way. And I believe that President Biden's Taiwan policy does not conflict with the one China policy, longstanding policy. And here I see General Yao smiling. I think one has to understand that from the beginning of a one China policy, that term had different meanings on to the PRC and to Taiwan. The United States has not said that it sides with either interpretation. It's another element of ambiguity, if you will. And so I expect this approach to be continued. I expect this administration to continue to speak to meet with the Taiwans and to do so in an appropriate way. Each administration has made somewhat different choices in this regard. The Taiwan Relations Act does stipulate that the recognition of China, I paraphrase, but the recognition of the PRC does not mean that the United States will not engage with Taiwan in various ways. And indeed that the United States will assist Taiwan in its military development. So I think that the policy, what you're seeing is continuation of policy. And there are people in the United States who are concerned that the leadership, Xi Jinping could miscalculate and decide it's time to apply strong coercive measures or even military measures against Taiwan. And that would, and of course, that would be a terrible miscalculation that would lead to war between the United States and China. I hope that he understands that, but I don't believe that it's helpful. I don't believe that it's helpful to modify the longstanding approach that the United States has on this issue, which is effectively strategic ambiguity, but at the same time, a clear commitment that the changes will not be undertaken by force or coercion, and an understanding of the complexities, if you will, of the One China policy. The United States I don't expect any unilateral changes in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. General Liao, do you have any comment on Mr. Miller's view on U.S. Biden administration's Taiwan policy?
Yeah, I think the Biden administration is still on the path to reinterpret the One China policy, or to reinvent the practice of One China policy, because some of the things that the government and the previous government has been doing is not the long-held norms. For example, Washington has elevated official ties with Taiwan and inviting Taiwan representative to Biden's inauguration ceremony, and has been sending or facilitating senior officers or senators, congressmen to visit Taiwan, and pushed for Taiwan's participation in international organizations. And also one important thing is that the sixth assurance to Taiwan, which was not part of the official interpretation of One China policy, now which had been added to as one element of One China policy. So at a time when China and the United States is getting ideologically competitive, Taiwan is frequently mentioned as a democracy or democratic entity, or even sometimes a democratic state, and that's in official documents. So that has special meaning for the mainland China too. So I do not quite agree with Ambassador Fujisaki's judgment that Taiwan is not a flashpoint, because US is strong there, but in China, Taiwan is a crucial national interest, a huge domestic political issue. And I just want to say, don't underestimate China's determination to use whatever means if necessary. And I can, as to Ambassador Fujisaki's prediction that Sankaku would be a flashpoint, I agree to a certain degree, but Sankaku is now disputed territory, and it will remain disputed territory between China and Japan. This status will not be changed. Thank you.
Thank you, General Liao. Now we have only
Mr. Minister, could I briefly
please.
respond?
Yeah. Mr. Miller,
I want to see if General Yao and I agree on a point, and it may not be the case, but I want to raise it.
Mm-hmm.
We may not agree on what would be the outcome of a conflict should it occur, and so we don't have to debate that. I have a view, and you probably have a view. But clearly my view is that if China undertakes any coercive action against Taiwan, it will be marked as a pariah and will suffer significant, not just diplomatic, but economic costs regionally and globally. And I'm talking not just about an invasion, but other steps. And I don't see any reason why that's in China's interest. And we can debate the presentation and the wolf warrior issue. our last administration sometimes, could have been possibly characterized in similar ways. But I think the basic calculation that it's not in China's interest to take any such dramatic action with respect to coercion seems to be widely held. It sounded as if you may or may not have that view, and I very much appreciate a clarification. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have only about less than 10 minutes, so we'll take some questions from the audience. Is there any question? Please raise your hand or, yeah, please. And please identify yourself and just make it clear to whom you are making question.
Sure, yeah. My name is Dr. Koo from London. And I'm now working in Cairo as a professor. It's great opportunity for to see three from the renowned scholar from US, China, and Japan. And my question is very clear. There are three blockings globally. US always pursuing justice. China always making original product. Japanese apologize, never apologize. There are three blockings and no one believe it. And my questions about is North Korean nuclear issue. Ironically, nowadays, North Korea's non-nuclear policy only maintained by Japan and Israel. Even US and South Korean government, they have so-called strategic uncertainty. It is really unbelievable in these days. Even US, even though they try to say they always pursuing justice, I think if the national interest is against about North Korean nuclear issues, they will change their stance. But only Japan and Israel, they always pursuing North Korean nuclear zero policy. Even South Korea is very vague. China also vague. The Chinese official statement, I never see they accept North Korea has a nuclear power. They never accept it. And US now changed, their stance is very vague. And I really don't understand. And South Korean government has always also problem. We have a problem. Sometimes we have to allow some level of North Korean nuclear. And some scholars against about it. I really want to ask about it to all of you. Yeah? Honorable Minister Kim Sung-wan and our Korean gentleman, the handsome guy, Professor Park, and three renowned speakers. Thank you.
So, can you sum up your question then? What is the main point of your
main point is, what is all of five scholars, what is your opinions about nuclear options in North Korea? What is our options of China, Japan, Korea?
I mean, Korea's option.
Yeah.
I see. Well, I'm a former diplomat, but today I'm a moderator. I'm not making my question, but Professor Park, can you make a...
I think it's better for Minister Kim to answer this question, but I think as I told you, the North Korean denuclearization is the issue that all of us should cooperate, including United States and China and Japan, because many people in Korea are talking about the denuclearization in the interest of the Korean people to avoid any war and then bring more peace on the Korean Peninsula. But I think it's such a narrow perspective. I think the reason why we have to denuclearize North Korea is to maintain peace and stability in the whole region and the stability of the global security order, because North Korea became a much bigger threat to other countries, not just to Korea. So I think we have to cooperate, and I think it is interest of all of us in U.S., China, and Japan to work on the betterment of the North Korean people and then the transformation of the North Korean regime for the interest of the whole region. I think we have to have a wider perspective to handle this issue.
Thank you, Professor Park. Is there any question? Or is a question from the online audience? No. Please. Yeah.
Thank you. I think my questions for all the four speakers. You talked about U.S.-China relations and their cooperative future, but we are seeing that increasingly world economies are much more dependent on technological advances such as 5G, EV, and microchips. And the problem is that currently China controls most of the world's rare earth elements and dominates these markets. Do you think in this context that the US and China can forge new relationships and partnerships in the future? Thank you.
I think it's better for Mr. Miller to answer that. Did you hear this question, Mr. Miller?
Yes, I understand the question is whether the U.S. and China can work together on rare earth minerals.
Yeah, rare earths and also battery, semiconductor chips. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Okay. And I think the answer is that the idea of a complete cutoff doesn't make sense for either country. Complete cutoff in trade, a complete cutoff in rare earth minerals, a complete cutoff in all information technology does not make sense. But I think each country needs to make itself comfortable that it is not vulnerable to a cutoff by the other country in the event of a crisis, and that taking steps over time to reduce dependencies makes a lot of sense. Obviously, that's true for rare earth minerals, where the United States has begun to take actions. It's true for semiconductors, 5G, et cetera, as well. And the reality is, from a U.S. perspective, it really is the case that we need to have trusted components and trusted networks. And in order to do that, although in some applications it's okay to have elements that may not be trusted, in many it's important to have highly trusted components such as our national critical infrastructure, including for telecommunications. And in those areas, I think each side taking care of its own supply chain and own technology. And by each side, I mean China on the one hand, and then the United States and the other nations, including Japan, South Korea, Australia, India, and many of the European countries as well. The majority of them have to have trusted standards and have to have understanding of how things work. If we ever get to a place in the U.S.-China relationship or into the call it West-China relationship where there's that degree of trust, it'll be a great step. In the meantime, we should be careful not to create any opportunities for concerns about vulnerabilities to create friction or create the possibility for a crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. General Liao, do you have any comment on this question? Or?
I mostly agree with Professor Miller. I think that complete decoupling in these areas is impossible and detrimental not only to both countries, but to the world economy as a whole. But I also think that supply chain, the credibility of the reliability of supply chain had to be considered in making national policies and to reduce over dependence on international supply chain for important, crucial material and technology.
Thank you. I think it's always time is all spent. And as I said during the questions and discussion that our four speakers, they are rather, prudent in defining China-US relations rather than see it as a competition. There is a combination of competition and cooperation as well. But frankly, we are very much affected by Professor Graham Allison's notion and also so many news articles that, and also as Prime Minister Lee Hsien-loong of Singapore said, it is a nightmare for countries in this region to be forced to choose between China and the US. So always our hope was that we will not face that real situation of making a choice. And in order to do that, countries in this region, including my country, Korea, Japan, and also together with ASEAN and all other countries, we should make more efforts and our concerted efforts to mitigate China-US rivalry, and we want to make it in the cooperative way. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Yeah, for all
Minister, can I say a last word?
Please, Ambassador Fujisaki, yes.
Thank you very much. Sorry to take your time. And we have discussed US-China relations and China's behavior. Following Professor Park, my good friend, I hope China changes from wolf warrior to smiling elephant, but smiling elephant not trampling or dancing around, but quietly walking. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. I wish to express my thanks again. Thank you again to our speakers and all the participants here, to our audience. Thank you so much. So session is concluded now.
Thank you. I will see you again soon.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
It's a
Bye-bye.
pleasure. Thank you, and see you again.
Look forward.
Thank you very much, Professor Kim, for your moderation, and my apologies to the mistake made earlier during your introduction. And thank you to all the discussants as well. 네, 여러분, 모든 참여자.
Thank you for your wonderful discussion. Let's give him a big round of applause. So we are going to have a lunch, and from 1:30, we will have Understanding North Korea session, Necessities and Constraints, hosted by Institute for National Security Strategy. Enjoy your lunch. Thank you.